The Homeless Man's Christmas, an original short story. Chapter 1. On Christmas Eve, the homeless man was miserable. The streets were almost empty now, save for the few people rushing home to their families for the important night in the late evening drizzle. No one took notice of the homeless man, sat in an obscure corner atop a piece of worn, soggy cardboard that barely served as a cushion between him and the cold bite of the concrete pavement. Rain turned into snow. The homeless man finally decided that if he was going to spend the night wallowing in misery, he would at least do it elsewhere. Christmas Eve was to be celebrated at home, and while that certainly wasn't happening for him, anywhere would be better than this dark, forsaken corner that had become all too familiar for his liking. So, he stood up, gathered his belongings into his knapsack, and began to walk. Everywhere he went, he was greeted with decorations, pretty lights, and signs reminding him in big neon letters that 'tis the season to be jolly. It was as if the city had conspired to mock him. Paying little heed to the signs, the homeless man kept walking. He did not know where he was headed, but it didn't matter to him. Aimless meandering had long become a feature of his life in the streets. He came to a modest house with large windows, one of whose curtains were undrawn. A warm, yellow radiance shone through that window, and the homeless man found himself drifting towards it like a moth to a candle. As he drew closer, he could see a family of 4 inside the house busy preparing for a Christmas feast. The father was placing extra logs in the fireplace, while his son and daughter arranged plates and cutlery on the dinner table. The mum appeared from the kitchen, carrying a magnificent turkey on the platter, roasted to golden brown perfection and garnished with a variety of trimmings. At the sight of the great bird, the 2 children bounded around the table in excitement, nearly knocking over the chairs. The homeless man's nose was almost pressing against the window pane now. The scene before his eyes seemed to hypnotize him. The food looked absolutely sublime, and a faint whiff assured him that it smelled even better. Every corner of the house was beautifully embellished with bells, wreaths, candy canes, and other ornaments. The children's laughter mingled seamlessly with the Yuletide music from the radio on the mantelpiece, and even on the other side of the window it sounded heavenly. A deep, painful hunger welled up within him, and not just in his belly. There he stood, until the father finally noticed the unkempt stranger staring in from outside the window. Unsettled, he hastily went over and drew the curtains shut. The radiance vanished in an instant, and the homeless man's trance was broken. The dark and cold returned once more. So he kept walking. He passed by many more houses, but this time he did not stop to look. The city was getting awfully quiet, so the homeless man thought to liven up the ambience with a Christmas carol. "Silent night, holy night," he sang. His frail voice quivered as a chilly draft blew his way, whistling a mesmerizing song of its own, a soft, hollow tune that seemed at once beautiful and sad. Determined not to be outdone, the homeless man took a deep breath as he got ready to belt out the next verse. But then he stopped short, and the air escaped between his chapped lips as a silent puff of vapor. He had forgotten the words. How could he have forgotten the words? It was such a nice song. The snow fell more and more heavily, turning into slush as soon as it touched the damp ground. His toes grew numb as the wetness seeped into his shoes. Very soon, the pair of feet at the end of his legs did not feel like his own anymore, but somehow they kept on wandering, as if they had a life of their own. Led by them, he arrived at a park in an unfamiliar section of the city. In the middle of the park stood a great pine, towering over the other trees in both height and lushness. So tall it was that whoever tried lining it with tinsel could only manage the lower third. The homeless man figured it was good enough for him. With weary steps, he trudged his way to the tree, laid down his belongings, and sat down on a grassy patch with his back against the trunk. He reminded himself to be thankful. After all, a half-decorated Christmas tree was more than all he received in the last couple of Christmases combined. Already things felt slightly more festive. All that was missing from the scene was a pile of presents waiting to be unwrapped. Presents, gifts, that was what Christmas used to be about. Those were happier times. Old memories stirred in his mind. He reached deep into his knapsack, dug around for a bit, and pulled out a cotton handkerchief. The handkerchief was light blue. It had been chosen to match the color of his eyes. On it, the following letters were roughly embroidered. Merry Christmas! You've been extra amazing this year. Love, Santa. He stared at the words at length, and as he did, a void seemed to grow within him. Underneath the Christmas tree, the homeless man began to weep. Chapter 2. The homeless man did not remember falling asleep, but the next thing he knew, he was waking up to a noise coming from beside him. He turned around and saw a peculiar old man with white, bushy eyebrows and a short moustache to match, brushing snowflakes off his winter jacket. "Pardon me, good sir," said the old man. "I did not mean to wake you." "It's all right," grunted the homeless man. "The name is Nick, by the way. Good evening." Nick extended a hand. The homeless man shook it warily, but did not return the greeting, nor reveal his own name and kind. He wasn't sure what to make of this stranger. Nick had a knapsack beside him, much like his own, except larger, but he did not look like someone who was homeless. There was a suave air about him, and he seemed a little too chuffed with himself to have been living in the streets. "Anyway, I found this lying a few feet away from where you were sleeping, so I figured you might have dropped it." Nick was holding up the embroidered handkerchief. The homeless man gave a cry of recognition. He shot out his hand and snatched at it more vehemently than he intended. "Sorry," said the homeless man quickly afterwards. He was clutching onto the handkerchief keenly with both hands, as though he was afraid he might lose it again. "It's just, this is very important to me." "An old Christmas present, I suppose?" The homeless man sighed deeply. "Yes, although it's probably not what you think." "Oh," said Nick, raising an eyebrow. The homeless man tilted his head back and gazed pensively at the night sky. "You see, she was such a smart girl, my daughter. When she was only 6, she had figured out that Santa wasn't real, and that it was actually Mummy and Daddy who were leaving her presents in the Christmas stocking each year. So, what did she do? She outplayed us at our own game, she did. On Christmas Eve, our own daughter waited until we fell asleep, and then left us presents in the name of Santa, pretty handkerchiefs she had embroidered all on her own." Can you believe it? My wife and I were flabbergasted, he said with a thin smile. That's absolutely brilliant, said Nick, looking impressed. No, it's the only good thing I own, said the homeless man sadly, reminiscing about his last happy Christmas. He lost his job the following year, turned foolishly and helplessly to the bottle, and his wife left him not long after, taking their daughter with her. In a few months, he was out in the streets, where he had been dwelling ever since. It was difficult to keep track of the years slipping by when time was the sole commodity one had too much of, but by the homeless man's reckoning, his daughter would be a woman now. What he would give just to see her again! He stuffed the handkerchief into the deepest pocket his coat had to offer, where he was sure it would be safe. The two men sat in silence for a while. At length, the homeless man spoke, partly to shift his attention away from the sad thoughts plaguing his mind. So, Nick, what is a person like you doing out here? Me? Working, of course. I am on a short break now, but in a couple of minutes I'll be off again. Working? At this time? On Christmas Eve? Lousy job, ain't it? Absolutely horrendous hours. The homeless man shrugged. Oh, I don't know. I'd do anything for a job these days, to be honest. Heck, I'd be happy to work on every Christmas Eve for the rest of my life, if it means I get paid enough to afford a piece of turkey at the end of the day. He was thinking of the feast he saw from earlier, and his stomach gurgled. Would you really? Said Nick, stroking his chin amusedly. Seems like you're really craving turkey then. In that case, can I offer you some? With that, he produced a box from his knapsack and handed it over. Perplexed, the homeless man cautiously lifted the lid off the box. To his surprise, it did contain a generous hunk of turkey drumstick. He held it up by the bone and marveled at it in wonder. Go on, eat it before it goes cold, said Nick. Sure enough, the meat was still succulent and toasty, almost as if it had been sitting in a warm oven all this while. It was the best thing the homeless man had eaten in months, if not years. In between big greedy mouthfuls, he half-jokingly asked Nick if he always carried around leftover turkey with him. I carry many things in my sack, replied Nick. There was a mysterious glint in his eyes. Anyway, you had better finish up quickly. We've got work to do. We? The homeless man's eyes widened, and he stopped chewing for a moment. Yes, we. You work for me now, see? You've just eaten most of your salary. I was kind enough to pay it up front, so you're most welcome. He nearly spat out the turkey. Hang on, I didn't agree to any of this. Well, you did say you'd do anything for a job if it gets you some turkey, said Nick with a sly grin. Come on, I might even throw you a nice Christmas bonus at the end if you do well. I can't help but feel tricked, the homeless man protested. What game was this strange old man playing? He was getting increasingly suspicious. Yet, at the same time, he was equally intrigued. The turkey was unquestionably delicious, and Nick didn't seem like someone who would actually do him any harm. Besides, it wasn't like he had anything better to do. All right, I'll do it. As long as it's not anything that would get me in trouble. Excellent, exclaimed Nick. He chortled heartily, celebrating the success of his cunning recruitment scheme. As soon as the homeless man finished cleaning the very last morsel from the bone, Nick got up and bade him follow his lead.
"What sort of work do you do anyway?"
asked the homeless man as they walked along the snow-laden path across the park.
"I am an artisan by trade," replied Nick. "But tonight, you and I are deliverymen."
They reached a thicket behind which Nick said his vehicle was parked. Just when he thought nothing about this stranger would surprise him anymore, the homeless man's jaw fell agape, for he now saw that this was no ordinary vehicle. It was a crimson sleigh of majestic build. Ornate carvings ran along its side. The seats were covered with luxurious velour. 8 sturdy reindeers with handsome antlers stood in pairs at the helm.
"I must be dreaming,"
the homeless man declared, pinching himself to no avail. There was that hearty chortle from Nick again.
"Ho, ho, ho,"
he went. Chapter 3.
"You look different than I expected,"
was all the homeless man could manage as they cruised through the sky at breakneck speed. They were going so fast that the world below had melted into a blur.
"Oh, I've trimmed down quite a bit over the years. The job gets easier when your girth doesn't exceed the size of most chimneys,"
said Nick proudly.
"Lost a ridiculous beard too. The only thing it was good for was to keep my face warm. But I've got a scarf for that now, and scarves are much easier to keep clean."
"Wait a minute," said the homeless man, still trying to take in all that was happening.
"If you're real, and you do indeed deliver presents, then how come I don't remember ever receiving anything from you as a kid? Don't tell me I was on the naughty list throughout my entire childhood." "The lies parents tell their children to make them behave," Nick exclaimed, shaking his head. "No such list exists, my friend, I assure you. Besides, it is often the naughtiest kids who could use some presents. Children don't grow up into bad people from receiving too much kindness after all. The opposite is usually true. At any rate, I'm sure you were a good kid. In fact, there are far too many good kids in the world for me to deliver presents to in one night. Why, I'd have to go so ruddy fast, I'd break the laws of physics."
"And I suppose a flying sleigh doesn't?" interjected the homeless man. Nick laughed, but did not address the question.
"Anyway, if you're wondering," he went on, "due to the logistical limitations, I only deliver presents to those who need it the most. Young or old, naughty or nice, doesn't matter. Everyone has times where they could really use a gift. Speaking of which, we've just arrived at the house of one such person. Hang on tight."
The homeless man heeded just in time, gripping onto the rail. With a whoosh, the sleigh dropped out of the sky and landed perfectly on the flat grey rooftop, somehow without making a sound. He had barely collected his wits when Nick handed him a small rectangular parcel from his knapsack and beckoned him towards the chimney a few feet from where they had landed.
"That's your job. I've been going up and down chimneys all night, and it's about time I got someone to do the legwork for me,"
Nick said, tossing him the end of a thick hempen rope. The homeless man peered down the soot-covered chute uneasily.
I've never done anything close to this before, he said. You'll be all right, said Nick, as confident as can be. Just be careful not to sit on the parcel by accident when you land. They are a pair of reading glasses, extremely fragile. The stocking is usually hung by the mantelpiece, so just find it and put the present inside. Also, try not to make too much noise. The poor dame who lives alone here is a light sleeper, as most elderly people are. I should know. I'm nearly 2,000 years old. Using the rope, Nick lowered the homeless man down the chimney at a pace far greater than he would have preferred. He covered his eyes, certain that he was going to crash painfully into the hearth. But much like the case with the sleigh, the landing was soft and without noise, as if cushioned by a spell. Once he was in the house, the rest was simple enough. He found the stocking, slid the present into it, and finally went back to the hearth, where he was hoisted back up almost as quickly as he had descended. When he surfaced on the roof, Nick patted him on the back and congratulated him on a job well done. The second delivery went much like the first one. This time, it was a tiny brick cottage in the countryside, and the parcel contained a toy plane. I'm guessing this present is for a kid then? Asked the homeless man as he got ready to go down the chimney once more. No, replied Nick with a chuckle. The toy is for the kid, but the present is for the mother. The homeless man wondered what that meant. Soon they were in the air again, flying towards their third and final house. I saved the best for last, Nick proclaimed. This person has been wishing for the same present for the past 15 Christmases, but I was only able to acquire it this year. The homeless man wanted to know what object it was that eluded even the great Santa Claus for so long, but Nick did not seem interested in telling him. They arrived at the final house, which was located in an unassuming suburb. Nick handed him a parcel even smaller than the first one. It was tiny enough to fit snugly in his pocket, and weighed so light that it did not seem to contain anything. Aren't you going to tell me what it is? Asked the homeless man. You'll find out soon enough, said Nick cryptically. Like before, he was lowered into the chimney. However, about halfway down, his descent came to an abrupt halt. He looked up, only to see Nick's face staring down at him. The old man was flashing a sheepish grin that plainly announced that more mischief was afoot. Nick, what's going on? He cried. His worried voice echoed along the chimney chute. Merry Christmas, came the reply. The rope snapped, and with a scream he fell freely like a loose bauble from a Christmas tree. There was no magical cushion this time. The resounding crash when he hit the hearth was loud enough to arouse not just the entire household, but possibly the neighbors as well. Ow! He groaned, rubbing his sore bottom. Luckily, nothing seemed to be broken. As he staggered to his feet, a young lady came rushing into the parlor to see what the commotion was about. She froze when she saw the soot-covered stranger emerging from the hearth. To his alarm, the homeless man became acutely aware of the number of laws he was breaking. That Father Christmas made him do it did not seem like a plausible excuse. He was certain that the lady was going to scream, and the authorities will be alerted, and he would be dragged away to rot in a cell. Yet, the lady did not scream. She was scared speechless, sure, but there was some other emotion there as well.
Her gaze was fixated on his face, as she seemed to be trying to stare past the suit and his scruffy beard.
Pardon me, miss, but I was sent here to give you something. A present. Wait, let me just... Give me a quick second.
He stammered, fumbling his pocket. Perhaps if he delivered his present then and there, he might just convince the lady that he meant no harm, or at the very least to not call the cops. But the parcel was nowhere to be found. It had vanished without a trace. In his panic, he yanked out the only thing that was in his pocket, the cotton handkerchief.
No, I don't understand. Where...
But the young lady's eyes, wider than ever, was now intent upon the handkerchief. She held out a slim hand.
Is that for me? May I see it?
Her voice was smooth as silk and clear as water, and somehow the homeless man thought it sounded familiar. The lady examined the handkerchief closely, brushing her fingers over the stitched letters. She then took a tentative step towards the homeless man, her light blue eyes piercing his own. He felt the soft touch of her fingers against his arm as she drew closer. A tingling sensation spread through his body right down to his toes, and it was not unpleasant.
Dad?
It was Christmas Day. Somewhere in the world, a lonesome dame with poor eyesight would finally be able to read all those letters her son, working in a faraway country, had sent her. In the countryside, a kid was overjoyed to receive a toy plane, for it was the exact model he had longed to own. But even happier was his single mother, who had been saving all year to buy the toy for her son, only to find that all the stores had sold out a week before Christmas. In a suburb, a daughter was reunited with her father after years of separation, in a warm, tearful embrace that lasted for many beautiful minutes. On Christmas Day, the homeless man found home.